The West does not tell the same story twice. Tonight a girl sat on his porch, holding her dead father's colt. On the ridge 3 horsemen stood still as grave markers. I stayed because the dry well was breathing, because gold lay somewhere under the dirt, and because of the clean-cut question, who is the traitor when the gun comes back to its rightful home? Wind ran along the dry river like a blade sweeping dust. The bank blazed white, streaked with old salt. The fence leaned, nails loose, wire touching, with a faint clang whenever the wind shifted. The wooden house sat low, gray-roofed, a corner of the porch missing a board. The abandoned well lay open, the rusted bucket hanging crooked like a mute bell. Inside, opposite the door, an old Winchester hung. The stock bore a crosswise scratch. When I was 13, I had sanded and rubbed it with linseed oil, the surface darker than the rest. The bolt screw's groove was half mangled from the night my father's screwdriver slipped in the rain. The smell of old gun oil mixed with dust and dry wood. It was the only part left of someone who had gone long before me. For 12 years I fixed whatever broke, set leaning posts straight, wrapped leaking pipes with cloth and wire. No one came by. No hoofbeats, no laughter. Only wind, and the ceiling fan ticking steady as a heartbeat, keeping a man awake through a short sleep. Some nights I woke at the faintest sound, keys dropping somewhere inside a dream, but found my shirt pocket still empty. That afternoon I rested the hammer on my thigh, wiped sweat with the back of my hand, eyes flicking to the porch. A small figure sat there. No sound of steps arriving. No sand shifted. She sat sideways, back against a porch post, head slightly bowed, hair tangled and matted with dust. The hem of her dress was frayed, dragging dry dirt. In her hands was a Colt Peacemaker. The steel frame was worn, the barrel scratched lengthwise, as if dragged across rock. The wooden grip bore a chip shaped like a fingernail at the lower edge. That mark I remembered. It was from my house. It was the thing that had vanished after one night too quick to name. Her finger lay along the frame, not inside the guard. She held it like someone who knew the weight of steel. Around her right wrist was a dark groove, as if rope had rubbed there. Her face was sun-dark, but under the dust was a pale, sleepless green. On the porch edge, a red-brown shell casing lay tilted, its tip crushed. I didn't remember leaving it there. I didn't go inside. I didn't draw the gun at my belt. I stood 3 steps away, the scent of dry wood and sun-baked dust sharp in my nose. Her eyes lifted slowly. Black, still, toward the northern ridge. 3 horsemen stood against the horizon, dark horses, riders straight as fence posts. The shine came from bit buckles and the angled barrels they held. No movement, no wave, no call. They stood like 3 nails waiting for someone to lift a hammer. I turned back. She still looked at me. My throat was dry, the swallow loud enough to hear. I raised my hand, slow, palm open. No threat. I stepped up half a tread, stopping where the porch board split wide each rainy season. My boot toe nudged a pebble. It rolled, dropped over the edge, tapped the dirt twice, then was still. "Thirsty?" I asked, my voice not sounding like mine. She didn't answer. Her gaze left my hand, paused on my empty belt, then slid to the Winchester inside. The door was half open, hinge giving a faint click from lack of oil. I knew that look. If I stepped inside to take the rifle, the space between would be open, open enough for a mind to change. I went around, down the steps, past the porch's left side to avoid the Colt's line. Out back, where the old trough lay like a dry canal, its bottom lined with rot. The bucket hung from a wood post, iron handle worn thin. I lifted it. The iron scraped the post with a dry rasp. This well was deep, but long without water. I knew, but there was a water can inside. I lowered the bucket empty, hearing the muffled whoomp of wind in its throat. The lightness in my hand made me tremble. I carried the can out, set it a man's reach from her, the wooden cap off, cold scent rising from the liquid, a rare thing in the heat. She glanced, but her hands stayed on the Colt. I sat on the lower step, one line above the dirt, far enough that if she fell, she wouldn't touch me. Sweat ran down my neck, grit sticking, itching. The porch shadow cut between us like a long blade. On the ridge, one horse stamped, head lifted, ears pointed south. The rider stayed still. Wind sent sand up to my knees. I blinked, both eyes burning from grit. When I opened them, the Colt was still there, still aimed at the space before my chest, not sighted, just held at range. There was a detail on the Colt's grip that pulled me back to another night. At the corner, where the wood grain swirled into an eye, a dark, leech-shaped stain lay dry. Again. My throat hurt. That, I said slowly, pointing at the Colt, belonged to someone dead. She didn't nod, didn't shake her head. Her lips were cracked, a bead of dried blood in the middle groove. The answer was in her eyes, not her mouth. Eyes don't lie at a time like this. They were like a waterless well, deep, dim, cold, still holding the smell of wet stone somewhere inside. A scrap of paper fell from my chest pocket when I bent to pick up the can's lid. I didn't remember putting it there. Yellowed, folded in four, one corner singed as if held near a flame. I shoved it back quickly. Her eyes flicked at it. She didn't ask, but looked like she knew. Wind off the dry river shifted. Sand pattered against the porch face. From the ridge, the gleam on a gun muzzle changed. One rider edged his horse half a step, enough for dust at the front hoof to burst up like smoke. They still didn't come down. They let the one under the porch roof make the first move. I pushed the can closer, let the wooden lid tap her boot toe, soft. She looked at it longer than she looked at me. Her left hand left the frame, touched the lid, pulled it toward her. The smell of water spread. She tilted a small swallow. The artery in her neck moved under skin, pulsing faint. After the second swallow, her hand lowered by one joint, the Colt's barrel brushing my chest only like a question. Inside, the ceiling fan let out a long sound, like an exhale. Sunlight swept across the Winchester, laying a crescent-shaped beam on the wall. I thought about standing, stepping in, reaching up to take it down, loading it, bracing my shoulder against the porch post. I thought about the open space as I turned my back. 3 steps. 2. 1. I thought about the drop of sweat that would fall from my chin to the board, without a sound, and a single shot deciding for me. She set the water can down. Her hand returned to the frame. I saw her trigger finger tremble slightly before it stilled. She didn't speak, but her eyes said, "If you go inside, I will keep you here." Not with words, with steel. From the ridge a crow called 3 times. This time one of them raised binoculars. The glass flashed. I remembered the cold ring of a scope against my eye socket, back when I rode with a cattle drive, seeing clearly what I wished I hadn't. Here she and I were like 2 young animals stepping out of the brush, standing in the sights of 3 dark shapes. The well, silent for years, gave back a thin sound as wind threaded its mouth. Like a coin dropping where no water waits. Like a memory falling into a place no one will pick it up. I didn't. Left calf, no shoes. Red dust caked the tops of her feet, thick. At the cracked heel, dried blood crusted. Those things told the rest. I didn't need her to say it. A hard wind tore across the yard, yanking the cloth from an old horse stall. 4 slats showed, one broken through, its end blackened from fire. The cloth fell, wrapping her ankle. She didn't flinch. She bent, lifted it away, set it aside, small, precise motion, like someone used to clearing obstacles in silence. I set my hands on my knees, palms still smelling of rust. I said, "Why is it in your hands?" The question came out dry, hard, lying on the porch like a thing no one wanted to touch. She looked past me, into the house. The beam on the wall had reached the Winchester, touching the dark patch I once rubbed in. She looked at that mark for some time. Then her eyes moved back, stopping at my chest, where the yellowed paper pressed against my skin. A long while passed without a word. On the ridge, the 3 shapes still stood in line. A fly landed on the rim of the water can, its legs brushing. I felt my heartbeat stretch for 1 count, then tighten again. In that long stillness, something strange appeared. The thought that the colt had not come here by itself. It had been brought, by a hand that knew the way, a hand that had once opened the gun cabinet without leaving pry marks, a hand that had the key. The choke came sudden, not from the gun pointed at me, but from that possibility. No name, no face, just the feeling of someone gently pushing open the old house's door again, in my head. The slick hinge, the sound of a palm on the grip with the leech-shaped stain. I had thought it stolen by a stranger, but now, for a moment, I wasn't sure. She adjusted her hold, fingers still outside the trigger. Her wrist shook only a little, like someone long standing on trembling ground. She didn't ask for food, didn't ask for a bed, didn't tell where she'd come from, just sat, in the afternoon sun, on the porch humming with wind, between 3 horsemen and a man who had stayed still too long. The sky dropped a shade, burn turning to dull brass. I knew inside there were long nails, a coil of rope, a hammer at the 3rd post, the old Winchester's leather wrap in the 2nd drawer. I knew the place of each, like I knew the lines in my hand. But I didn't move. Every move would be a statement. Here, statements lived in steel. A rock rolled on the ridge. The right-hand horse snorted dust from its nose. The binoculars lowered. No one came forward. No one turned back. She and I stared straight at each other, eyes unblinking. Between us sat the water can, the cool scent still fresh, and a space wide enough for anything to pass through. Another pace. The smell of dust shifted. The crow called again. I thought, slowly, about tonight. About a knock that might come. About whether I would stand or run. About the Winchester inside and the Colt outside. About the leech-shaped stain on its grip. She didn't leave. Neither did I. Wind laid a hollow sound on the well's rim, dropping a long question no one had yet answered. On the ridge, 3 shapes waited. Under the porch, 2 people waited for the other to breathe first. And the Colt, old story in metal, held the whole house still in one beat. like a finger pressed to lips to hush. In this land, silence comes before every shot. I heard it swell tight enough to swallow. It caught in my throat, and I knew from this beat on, 12 years of quiet were done. Only the choke remained, hanging like a bucket over a dry well, waiting for someone to pull. She tilted her head, voice rough, enough to be heard through the wind. The one who let you live is dead. Wind shifted over the dry river, sending dust across the porch. On the ridge, the 3 horsemen stayed in line, unmoving. The shine on their bit-hooks shifted, flashing like fish eyes in a pail. No call, no spur. They waited. I didn't reach out, didn't step back. She held the Colt at her thigh, finger outside the guard, steady, eyes fixed on my face. The rope mark dark on her wrist showed clear in the slanting light. My throat felt scraped, raw, like swallowing sand. "Name?" I asked. "Rhea," she answered short, unmoving. "They're tracking this gun. Wherever it's seen, the person there dies." Wind skimmed the rim of the water can, tossing the smell of iron into my nose. I looked past her into the house. The Winchester still hung in its place, the dark patch on the stock round as a coin. The door stood half open, hinge scraping faintly, like someone telling you not to move. On the ridge, the middle rider lifted a hand, then let it drop. Dust puffed around the horse's hooves, then settled. The afternoon sank lower, the shadows of 3 figures stretching long like dark whips, lashing the sand. "Why me?" I asked. Rhea didn't answer. She only watched the breath at my collar, then the scrap of paper jutting from my chest pocket, its corner burned away. She raised her eyes again. In the black pupils, my shape warped in the fractured light. I motioned. She gave the porch, closed the main door, slid the wooden bar, pulled the small wedge and set it under the door's foot to keep it from sticking. The sun touched the ridge. The house's shadow climbed halfway into the yard. On the ridge, the 3 horsemen turned their mounts south, then back again as if testing the wind. They didn't come down. I stood behind the curtain, watching the long trail of dust they left when they shifted their hooves. They were scenting this place like hounds. The smell of fresh water, the smell of a stranger, the smell of steel. Night came slow, like a sick man walking. I didn't light the lamp right away. In the dark, the ceiling fan was just a 4-bladed shadow. I set the Winchester on the table, checked the firing pin with my fingers. The steel touched cold. Cartridges lay in a row inside a dented tin box, lid bent at one corner. I broke off 2 and slipped them into my pocket, left the rest lined as habit. 2 knocks. Heavy. The door's wood shook. The latch groaned. I didn't startle. 3 more knocks, evenly spaced. I took the short beam leaning against the wall, eased the wedge from the door just enough to crack it, held by a thin chain. My eyes, used to the dark, caught the shape. A wide-brimmed hat, shadowing half a face. Brim edges frayed. Whiskers coarse as wire. The smell of stale whiskey and dried sweat. "Looking for someone?" I asked. The man's voice was heavy as nails in wood. "Looking for a thing. And a man. The thing's a colt. The man's the son of the one who killed my brother." From the tack room, I heard the faint pull of cloth. I set my hand against the door, holding my breath. "Name?" I asked again. "Hollis." He spat through his teeth. "My brother's name was Wade." He ran his hand along the doorframe, fingernails black with old grime. "You're you and Cole. Don't bother denying it. This land and this house say it for you." Behind him, two more shapes stood at the porch's edge, boot tips touching the planks, rivets catching the light in small points. One man spun the cylinder of a six-shooter, the clicks sharp as a scorpion tapping stone. They stood under the sagging wooden sign. The word Cole faded to gray streaks. "I need to see inside," Hollis said. "There's someone here. I can smell it." "I brewed coffee this evening," I said. "That's the smell." "Your coffee smell like blood?" the man on the left snorted. His breath was sour, like meat left out in the sun. I didn't answer. I wedged my Colt's grip in my memory, brushed the paper in my pocket, pressing against my chest all these years. I swallowed. My throat clicked dry. No denial, no admission. I left the words sitting between us like a stone no bare hand could turn. "You've got the Colt, don't you?" he went on. "Hand it over, walk free. We only want that." "I've got a Winchester hanging." I nodded toward the dark behind me, where they could only see the black frame and the fan's shadow. "The Colt's not here." One man struck a match on his boot heel. The flare was short, his face showing, narrow eyes, a scar down the upper lip dragging his mouth into a crooked smile. He lit a cigarette, blew smoke through the crack. The match sulfur bit the air. Underneath, the faint tang of gunpowder. "Funny," he said around the smoke. "We smelled it from the ridge. Old gun oil mixed with a man's sweat. The smell of someone who's held a gun a long time." "Breathe deeper," I said flat. "You might catch the dust off me too." Hollis gave a short, hard laugh. He stepped closer, his boot toe touching the door's edge, heel nails scraping wood. "I don't care about the dust. I care about the name, Stone." My throat tightened. "I don't know, Stone." "You lie bad." He leaned in so close I saw the red thread in his eye. "Your father. He left the burnt stink of the dead across this land. You think we forgot?" From the tack room, the tarp shifted half a finger's width. I heard a breath broken into small pieces. I edged my body to block more of Hollis's view. He tapped twice on the wood, like knocking on a coffin lid. "We ride off tonight. Come back at first light. If we see a gun barrel over this porch, we shoot first. If not, we come in, open every drawer, pry every floorboard, rip open every sack of corn. Quick or slow, it's up to you." He stepped back. The man on the left raised his revolver, didn't aim, fired into the sand a yard from the porch. The shot cracked like a hammer blow. Gunpowder flared sharp, stinging. Dust burst up in a blind cloud, sweeping into my face through the crack. They hadn't fired into the house. They'd fired into the silence to break it. "See you tomorrow, Cole," Hollis said, dragging the last word like a rope. They turned. Boot nails on the steps, porch boards groaning, sand grating under the horses' hooves. Last, the dry, short sound of a hand on a bridle buckle. Then quiet. The smell of gunpowder drifted in the wind like false rain before a drought. I stood longer. My hand stayed on the wood, skin damp. A patch of my shirt stuck wet to my back. When I was sure the yard held only crickets, I locked the chain, set the bar, slid the wedge back under. I lifted the Winchester from the wall, loaded a round. The fire. Ria's eyes showed first, then her mouth. She didn't ask, "Are they gone?" She didn't need to. The smell of gunpowder was still thick. I motioned for silence. She slid out, low, moving on her knees and hands. The Colt was still in her grip, the trigger guard's groove pressed into her skin. We didn't light a lamp. The thin new moon cut a silver blade across the floor, splitting the house in two. I took her to the kitchen corner where I'd once stacked corn sacks. I set down the water can and a tin cup. She didn't drink. She sat with her back to the wall, eyes fixed on my face. The moonlight edged her eye in white. "I didn't know Wade," I said. My voice sounded wrong to me, not because of Wade, because of Stone. Hollis had dropped that name like bait, still twitching on the hook. I'd answered with a short line. That short line left hanging something larger, heavier, pounding to be let out. Rhea didn't nod, didn't shake her head. She only watched, silent, both arms around the Colt like holding a sleeping child. I saw the thin groove on the grip's edge again. It sat there still but made my throat catch, like a large grain of sand lodged in the flow of water. "Why did he call you that?" she asked, her voice low, clear. "They needed an excuse," I said. Excuses usually rest on something. Her words didn't rise, didn't corner. They sat on the ground like a stone. Out here you step around a stone or slip because you think it's nothing. Wind slid through the small crack I'd left to let the gunpowder scent bleed out. It whistled a thin note. Outside, grasshoppers broke into separate voices. I heard my own heartbeat change its pace, long then short, like a man walking over uneven rock. "They'll be back tomorrow," I said. "You should sleep. You'll need your strength by morning." "You think I can sleep when you haven't answered?" She didn't smile, didn't taunt, just looked. I set the Winchester down beside the bench, near my hip. Pillow made from an old coat roll, in my chest pocket, the yellowed paper pressed against bone, the scorched corner poked through the fabric with each deep breath. I didn't touch it. I knew what was on it. The words weren't for tonight. Pulling them out would make the night longer, tighter, maybe leave no morning at all. She pulled her knees up, wrapped her arms, chin on kneecap, eyes still open. I hung a thin blanket to cut one slice of moonlight so her sight wouldn't be lined up with a barrel outside. The smell of powder had faded, but still clung at my collar like a long memory. The stove had cooled since afternoon. I set a kettle on it, just enough for the small sound of metal touching metal. That sound made the house feel lived in, breathed in, enough to trick an ear pressed against the wall. I took off my boots, set them by the door so anyone pushing it open would stumble a half beat, lift a gun. Rhea spoke suddenly, eyes still on me. "If they ask you that question again tomorrow, will you tell the truth or lie?" "Which question?" "The son of the man who killed." Her line was straight, no curve. I didn't dodge, but the answer stuck like dry leather on the tongue. I looked out the small window, where the yucca's shadow marked the sky like a many-fingered hand. Far off, the ridge was dark, blending into the night. But I knew they were there. They didn't need to see me to know I was sitting here. They only needed to smell and wait. "I'll say what's needed to keep you alive," I said at last. "The rest, if there's any left to say." Rhea blinked for the first time in minutes. Moonlight glinted off her lashes, turning to a thin silver line. She laid the Colt flat across her thighs, palm open now, no longer clutching. Not from trust, from fatigue, from reaching the point where every muscle needed rest to keep the breath quiet. The night tightened, heavy as a wet blanket. From the doorway, the wind carried the cold smell of earth, mixing with the one that hadn't left. In the silence, I could hear my own heart, and another sound, a small choke that never left the throat, when the word "stone" slid across my mind like a dull blade. It didn't cut through. It only scored deep enough to bleed by morning. In the kitchen corner, Rhea kept looking, her gaze like a fixed pin on a clock face, pointing at the delay I still owed. No push, no release. Between us lay the Winchester, the Colt, a water can, with its lid askew, and the scent of powder holding in the air. They sat still, like evidence with no statement. The floor creaked. Not me, not her, maybe wind, maybe wood stretching. I set my hand on the rifle's barrel, finger outside the guard, matching exactly how she'd held hers that afternoon. She tilted the Colt, the grip toward the crescent moon. A dark, leech-shaped stain surfaced in the same spot. She set her thumb on the grip's edge, touched a thin groove along the bottom. That groove, earlier, before pulling the tarp in the tack room. I'd ignored it then. Now she set her nail in the slot, pulled. The wood lifted with a faint pop. A thin panel slid out like a blade. Inside was a small hollow. She tipped the Colt. A silver piece dropped into her palm. Oval, edges worn, center engraved. Not letters, a mark, 4 short lines converging, like a broken star or a flower missing petals. The cut was deep, edges still sharp enough to draw blood if pressed. She set the silver on the tin cup's rim, letting the moon sweep over it. The carving dulled, then flashed again. I looked. In my chest pocket, the yellow paper pressed to my bone, the scorched corner biting my skin. On that paper, years ago, was the same mark, drawn in faded pencil, hand shaking, edges twitching. I didn't take it out. I remembered well enough. Your father didn't die the way you believe, Rhea said, still level. He betrayed them, took the gold the crew had dug up. This piece is the key, the grips, the box. She snapped the panel back in place, the sound of wood on wood, small and clean. They're chasing me because I took the key. For a while, no sound. Even the ceiling fan stopped, as if tired. The choke didn't come from her words. It came when the engraving on the silver bit into my eyes, exactly like the faint pencil mark on the paper I'd kept too long. The same skewed curve, the same sudden break. Whoever cut the silver had a good blade. Whoever drew on the paper used a dull pencil. Same hand? Same mind? I didn't know. I swallowed. My throat stayed rough. Where does the silver lead? I asked. Sand and stone, she said. A canyon. A cut marked by 4 slashes on the rock face. Like this symbol. She held the silver closer. Her hand smelled of dust and fine iron. Do they know? Half, she said. The ones on the ridge know there's gold. They don't know the mark. I know the mark. She lowered her hand, set the silver back into the Colt's grip, slid the panel closed. It fit tight. They know the Colt. They can smell the old oil. That smell sticks to the one who's kept it. Outside, somewhere, a bird beat its wings. Then, quiet. I set my palm on the Winchester to keep my fingers from finding my chest pocket. The cold steel woke me to keep wood and sand. You know which way's more for you. I heard my heartbeat shift into a new gear, like a door swinging on a new hinge. No catch, but then came the ridge. I stood, checked by habit, saddle strap, cartridge pouch, leather wrap for a barrel. My hands worked while my head replayed the words, son of the man who killed. The phrase frisked me, didn't fall, didn't slip, sat right in the hollow of my chest. I stepped to the small window, lifted the cloth. The yard held only the yucca's shadow, long fingers counting wind. The sand between porch and stable was spotted with fresh tracks, small, deep, no others, the rest rode horses. Round-headed nails, I knew the pattern. By morning those nails would stamp a string of coins into my yard. I turned. When? Before sunrise, she said. Go while the wind's still cold. The scent fades quicker. Dust doesn't hold long. By high sun, they'll see our backs, not our trail. She rose, checked the colt's strap, pulled it one hole tighter, the notch worn in old leather. I'll ride your horse. You lead the first half. I take the second. You know the way? I know the rock. I know where the mark is cut. She paused, gauging the doorway's height, as if measuring passage. And I know where they catch themselves when they think they're clever. I went to the storage room for the saddle, leather dry, stiff, the pommel split and hand-stitched. I hauled it out, metal rings brushing the hook with a muffled bell sound. The gray gelding tossed his head as I set it on his back, night sweat cooling on his coat, breath steady. I threaded the cinch, tightened enough. No tighter than usual. Tight means distance. By morning, we'd need to look like we'd gone to the river and back. I packed the saddlebag, ammo, rope, folding knife, oiled rag, the tin box with half-spent cartridges. Passing the table, my hand brushed the paper in my pocket, without thought. I didn't pull it. The night didn't need more fire. I reached for the Winchester on the wall, stopped halfway, left it, took the shotgun from the lower drawer, the one that told no one stories, slipped it into my belt, barrel snug to my side, cold against my hip. Rhea stood on the porch, eyes on the ridge. Night had made it a single block, but I saw what she saw, a quick pinprick of fire, like a match had just struck, then gone. They're not sleeping, she said. They're waiting, I said. She set her hand on the porch post, smoothed along the grain. Bad, fine, rough. Stopped where a nail head stuck up a little, pressed it flush. You can still change your mind when the door opens, she said, not looking at me. Changing your mind is a way to live. I changed mine 12 years ago, I said. It's kept me alive. As done. We slept an hour, maybe less, not deep. Every small sound had a name. Wind, wood, sand, wild hogs at the dry river, backs rubbing yucca stalks. When the sky turned pale like wet cloth fresh from wash, I rose. I locked the back door, tied a strip of white rag to the stable hook so anyone from afar would think someone was still working the place. I stirred the old ash, let the smoke mix with morning breath. Go, I said. We led the horse north, keeping to the back of the stable, along the dry riverbank, light steps. In soft sand, Rhea went ahead, stepping on firm patches, eyes measuring from ankle to knee, the walk of someone used to traveling in the dark. I tied a dry thorn branch to the horse's tail, dragging a thin brush to scuff new prints. At the edge of the flat, she mounted first. No sound in the movement. I swung up after, knees locking the saddle, rein loose. We said nothing, didn't look back. Looking back would show me the small window, the torn curtain, the Winchester's hook, and the space for the colt now on her thigh. Everything else stayed in its place. It wasn't their fault. The light grew, ground shifting from lead to ash gray. Cold air slid down my collar like a clean blade. We pushed through low cactus, spines scraping the saddle leather with dry whispers. I avoided the darker patches of sand. Dark means damp. Damp takes a deeper print. Rhea pointed when she saw a narrow crack running across the ground. "Don't step." Beneath was a prairie dog hollow, soft collapse. At the foot of the rocks, she dismounted. "From here, no hoof on bare stone," she said. We led the horse, toes finding the dirt seams between slabs. Salt sweat stung my eyes. Breath showed as thin mist, then vanished. Behind us, far above, I heard metal brush horsehide, faint. A voice said something, the wind filing it down to a scratch. No words, just meaning they'd left the ridge. We took the first slot canyon, the rock pale red, wind carved into ribs like a whale's side. Sun hadn't yet reached the bottom. Cool stone held a night's damp. Our steps echoed hollow. Rhea stopped at a flat rock, swept dust from a corner with her fingertips. 4 shallow cuts came clear, converging like the mark on the silver. She didn't linger, just one nod. We moved on. At the third bend, the ground rose. I caught her rein, gave a small pull, stop, pressed my ear. The loose rock we moved in a zigzag, feet quick, never resting long. A stone slid, fell, rolled down. I held my breath. The sound hit the canyon, echoed 4 times, then was gone. From far behind I heard the horses stop. The faint scent of warm hide drifted in. Rhea pointed to a slit on the right, narrow as a knife's cut. In! We angled our bodies, slid through, cold rock brushing shoulders. Inside the slit was a short passage opening onto a natural ledge. From here, the canyon floor lay below like the bottom of a bowl. The wind shifted oddly here. The smell changed. A trace of iron, a trace of people. I turned, drew the horse close. Rhea knelt, set her palm flat to the rock, as if listening through skin. She looked at me, straight, brief. The second mark was near. We found it on a waist-high standing stone. 4 cuts, deeper than the last, the edges worn from hands touching. Not one hand, many, through years, through dust, through comings and goings. My throat tightened, same as with the silver, same as with the paper pressing in my pocket. These 4 weren't from someone learning, they were habit, made by one who knew they'd return. "One more," Rhea said. "Third hollow has the chest." She stood, pulled the cinch strap, smoothed the gelding's hide, settling him. "If we go down now, they'll see our backs. If we climb higher, they'll see our shadows. Choose." I looked at the sky. The sun had just cleared a spine of rock, laying a thin blade of light along the canyon rim. This light killed shadows well, but showed the dust of feet. I drew a long breath, testing for gun scent. Not yet. I motioned, climbed 2 more rock heights, then cut down diagonally under the cover of a broken tree. She nodded. No argument. We climbed. The rock warmed under our palms. Shirts stuck, breaths short but steady. At a cut in the slope, I looked down. On the canyon floor, 2 riders had just entered. Not Hollis, the other 2. Horse manes sliced the wind into thin lines. One lifted his head, scenting. He pointed to a scraped patch in the sand. Ours, back at the loose rock. My mouth tightened. Rhea's hand closed on my wrist, pressed me flat to the rock. One motion, no words, don't breathe, deep. We stayed until the hoofbeats drifted away. When I breathed again, the dry stone smell turned sudden, like singed cloth. My throat closed, not for the men behind, for a flash in my head, the 4 marks on stone, the silver, the paper. Which hand cut, which hand drew, which hand left them? Each question a pebble. pressed 2 fingers into them, felt the rough edges, the even strokes, unhurried. Whoever carved this hadn't been running. He worked certain no one would come in time. Thinking that, my throat caught harder. "What's in there?" I asked. "A chest. Could be gold, could be something else," Rhea said. She looked straight at me, not the hole. "Could be an answer, or another question." I pulled the scarf from my neck, wrapped my right hand against sharp stone. I tried to hand her the Colt, but she already had it gripped. I ducked, slid into the black mouth. Close earth smell, old coolness against my face. Behind me, the wind shifted. From down the canyon came a short whistle, answered by another farther off. The shadow trailing us hadn't left. They stopped when we stopped, moved when we moved. "In and out quick," I said low. "If we see what we need, we take the east ridge out. No backs on bare rock." Rhea nodded, eyes still outward. I crawled in. Dry dust clung to my elbows. Knees hit cold stone. Inside, space widened to a cupboard size. My hand found wood, rough edge, old iron nails. I traced the side, found the lip. There was a lock, small, the kind a workman might use. I slid my folding knife into the gap, eased it. The wood knocked once like bone in a box. The lid came open, old scent lifted, leather, oiled paper. Sweat dried years ago. Inside wasn't only gold bars, a small cloth pouch, a coil of leather cord, and, my throat tightened, a yellowed sheet, folded in 4, with the same scorched corner as the one in my pocket. My breath shortened. Cold sweat slid along my temple. I touched it. On the paper, the 4-mark symbol, drawn darker, and beneath it 3 letters written in haste, the second letter shaking badly. The last letter's line broken. I didn't read it. Folded it back, slipped it into my shirt. In my head, the son of the man who killed came again, but the tone had changed. No longer only a threat, now a new nail driven into a different board. Outside, Rhea whistled. Once. Urgent. I slid the lid shut, backed out, dust streaking my cheek. She leaned close to my ear. "They're climbing." I didn't ask from where. I heard hoof on rock from the west, close. I took the reins, dropped the horse's head. "East ridge," I said. "Cut the wind." We moved along the ledge, bodies to the stone, juniper scraping our necks, toes quiet. I didn't look back at the chest. Didn't look at the 4-mark, stripping the scent in one short beat. Sun began to pour into the floor, slicing shadows into pieces, and the trail ahead was no longer straight. It bent towards something I only then understood. Truth has a smell, and it sticks like gunpowder. The more you rub, the more it spreads. Through the narrow pass, the wind turned. The smell of cold stone pulled back into the crevice, leaving the scent of horsehide and old iron. The path squeezed our bodies, rock brushing shoulders with white chalk lines. Rhea led, left hand resting light on the stone, as if feeling its pulse. Her nails scraped over dry moss, making the faint sound of an insect's wings. I brought the horse close. The rein looped around my wrist. My heartbeat matched the grind of my boot soles against the gravel. At the 4th bend, a small rock cairn, 3 stones stacked uneven. Rhea paused half a beat, tapped the top one with her boot. It rolled, revealing a folded oilcloth tied with hemp cord. She didn't look at me. She picked it up, snapped the knot. Inside were 5 paper-wrapped .45 rounds, faint oil scent clinging. Brown paper, edges cut with a dull blade. I'd seen paper like that on the porch of one man, Hollis. He wrapped his cartridges in old paper, the corners always curled like dirty fingernails. She slipped 2 into her pocket, handed me 2 without asking. The last she tucked into her hatband. She didn't say spare. She didn't need to. I looked at the rock face. Beneath the oilcloth, 3 claw marks ran parallel, no deeper than a fingernail. A sign, a rhythm code. A stranger would miss it. A man from the circle would know. My throat tightened, dry as powdered stone. Trust broke like a tin cup hitting wood, quiet, but with edges sharp enough to cut. "Yours," I said flat. "Mine," she corrected, eyes steady, voice unchanged. "Before I left them." The back of my mind noted one more stroke. She didn't apologize, didn't explain. She only replaced the stone over the sign, fitting it as before. Done. Move. Behind us, hooves sank into sand, then struck stone. A man's whistle, cut short, answered by a longer one. Rhea tilted her head, listening. Her eyes didn't flicker. She knew the code. I glanced at the grain on the Colt's grip under her cloth wrap, the leech-shaped stain still there. My hand tightened on the reins. To turn back was to meet them. To stop was to die. My father was called a betrayer, I said low. I still have to see. I wanted to add and choose which is true, but the words stuck, gritty as sand between teeth. We cut north where the rock walls sank away, revealing a hollow like a great bowl. The burial ground lay there. No marker, no sign, just a dead tree, black as rusted iron, 3 branches bare, one snapped and hanging by its bark. On the stone at its base, 4 cuts converged, a flower missing petals. The mark repeated, deeper here, made with a better blade. At the edge of one groove, a burnt hair clung in an old crack. Something had been burned here once. I saw it with my eyes, smelled it in the earth. Old ash. Rhea knelt, knees on cracked ground. She reached between 2 slabs, nails scraping dry soil, and pulled a leather strap looped once. She hauled. Up came a low wooden chest, corners bound in thin iron, nails red with rust. The left edge showed the wear of hands opening it, pale, smoothed grain. The box had been touched many times. Hooves rang on the far rim. They weren't hiding now, no need. Dust kicked up, drifting thin in the glare. 3 shapes stood on the basin's lip. Hollis wasn't in the middle. The man in the center I didn't know, but his seat was like a stake driven at a slant. The one on the right was the match striker, narrow eyes, cigarette clamped in the wind, its smoke stubborn. The third was shorter, his hand already on the frame of his revolver. They stood high, the sun at their backs, casting long shadows into the basin like 3 black flags driven into earth. "They're here," Rhea said, not looking at them. Her hand rested on the chest's lock. Beside the lock was a small latch hole, fresh knife gouge at the edge. I knew she could open it in 2 beats, but she didn't. The middle rider spoke, voice cracking down like a whip. I caught one word. Give. He extended his hand, didn't hurry to draw. He wanted me closer. The basin was the trap. Step in and you had 4 walls higher than you. 3 men were enough to close it. Rhea stood, dust lifted from her hem. She turned to me. The colt left her thigh like it knew the way. She threw it. The steel flew clean. I caught it. Its weight landed in my palm like an old memory, cold metal, the smell of aged oil. The leech stain on the grip hit my eye, bit somewhere behind my tongue. My pulse jumped in my hand. "Now prove it," Rhea said, voice flat. "Whose life do you protect with your father's gun?" The question sat in the basin like a stone. Not big, but every step after had to go over it. I thumbed around into the empty chamber, cocked the hammer, the ratchet, her head never dipping far enough to lose her line of sight. Her hand set on the lock. She held for a beat. Just long enough for me to see the wind's track sweeping dust from left to right. Long enough for me to catch the gleam of a broken shard on the chest's edge. A signal mirror. Someone had set it, so the men on the rim could see. I didn't aim for Hollis. He wasn't here. I aimed for the center man. His hand gave the signs. The one giving signs was the head of the chain. I squeezed on the wind shift, dropping the muzzle half a degree to ride it. The shot cracked clean. The scent of old powder bloomed, different from last night. The Colt's powder had age in it. The center man jerked back, fell from the saddle like an empty sack. The reins slipped. His eyes stayed open, lips moving without words. Dust blew up over his face and stuck. Rhea turned the lock as the shot's echo fell away. The catch snapped. The chest's lid lifted. Inside was a mold-stained hemp bag tied with copper wire. She pulled out 2 smaller bags, didn't check, didn't count. She tossed one aside like bait. It hit the dust, spun up grit, flashed a sliver of gold. Both men, still standing, followed the flash without meaning to. I put the second shot into the rock in front of the narrow-eyed one. The stone burst, chips striking his horse's face. The animal reared, shrilling, stumbling back. He spilled from the saddle, his hand losing the gun. It hit stone with a dry knock. The shorter man fired quick. The round bit into the dirt bank beside the chest, kicking up a strip of sand. Hot grit slapped my forearm, stinging, shallow. Rhea tucked the 2 bags under her arm, broke for the basin's left edge where a crumbled ledge made a dust curtain. She didn't say, "Go," didn't say thanks, didn't look at me. Only dropped her left shoulder so the sack hugged her ribs, right hand keeping the Colt in my place. The 3-beat thud of her horse's hooves and she was in the saddle. I didn't see her mount. Only the plume of dust cutting behind the dead tree. The short man leveled his gun toward her. I couldn't reload in time. I threw myself right, boot kicking the barrel's edge. My back scraped raw on stone. He fired. The bullet drove into the dead tree's trunk, shaking the broken limb until dry bark fell rattling like old bones. Her hoofbeats were already a beat farther. I rolled, brought the Colt up, thumbed the hammer, fired low, between the short man's horse's legs. The horse leapt, tossing him sideways. He hit sand shoulder first, rolled, grunted. His revolver dropped into a crack, muzzle buried in grit. I held my breath. On the rim, the narrow-eyed one had chest. Slammed the lid down, latched it, took nothing. At the edge, a scrap of paper fell, thin as an insect's wing. The wind lifted it, dropped it at my boots. I didn't pick it up. My eyes stayed on the rim. The narrow-eyed one drew something from his coat, a small glass, and held it up. The lens winked. He was sighting the rock edge, the route I knew curved behind the basin, the route Rhea had taken. Her hoofbeats finned, broke into dots, vanished like rain on hot ground. Her shape dropped off the stone's lip. Only a torn strip of dust floated in the sun. I lowered the Colt, barrel to the dirt. The smell of its old oil clung in my palm, sank into the lines, lodged under the nails. Wind wouldn't take it. The short man dragged himself upright, fingers raking sand for his pistol, nails scraping raw. The narrow-eyed man said nothing. He watched me. Long. Then turned his horse, the black mane whipping his nape into a dark line. I heard his tongue click the bit. Dry, brittle. They skirted the rim, never coming down, leaving me in the basin with the chest, and the dead tree like a trap, already spent. I stood, back wet, sand glued to the sweat in a powder crust. I bent, picked up the Colt's spent shell. Still hot, its rim bore faint notches from the old cylinder. I slipped it into my pocket, not as proof, to keep my hands full, to keep the question from breaking loose in my mouth. The basin stayed empty. The cracks in the ground still lay there. The foremarks at the tree's base stayed, not faded. Wind funneled through the canyon, carrying iron with the salt of hide. In the white light, nothing had its own shadow. I turned toward the rock edge, where Rhea had gone. No sign, but the slow-falling dust. The words she'd left me at the road's start still sat in my throat. The one who let you live is dead. I wasn't sure who she meant. The one who hid the chest, the one who carved the mark, the one who fired to clear the way, or a man who'd stood 12 years by a dry well, only now stepping away. I slid the Colt into my belt. The grip touched my hip, its dark stain brushing the fabric with the faint scent of dried blood. I tied the chest's strap, pressed the catch, took nothing, covered nothing, left the basin as it was, then led the horse up the slope. Each step the sand folded in over my tracks, erasing them before the next landed. Behind me, the sound of her hoofs was gone. Only the tumble of one loose rock somewhere unseen, falling twice, then still. I came back when the house's shadow had bitten deep into the sand, like an old plow cut. The fence, still unfinished, cooled ash on the stove. On the wall, the Colt's hook stood bare, 2 pegs showing, tips red from sun. The dust halo around the empty space, darker than the rest, shaped like something lifted, a fish pulled from wet sand. I stood a beat in front of it, didn't reach up, didn't cover it. The Winchester was still where it hung, exactly over the dark patch I'd once oiled. The stock warm to the palm, barrel cool. I lifted it, hung it back, left it empty. On the table, the dented tin box of cartridges sat where it had been. I opened it, counted with my eyes, never touching. Everything in the house as before. Only the missing thing now stood the size of a wall. I scraped the dry mud from my heels with my knife, knocked twice on the door frame to drop it clear. The sound short, dry. Above, the ceiling fan turned slow, one blade trembling on its worn pin. I pulled out a chair, the leg whispering long against the floor. On the table was a dark ring from an old cup. I set another cup directly on it. Didn't pour, left it empty. Outside, the wind passed through the yucca row, stiff leaves rasping like a whetstone. No hoofbeats, no voices. If there were, I'd hear them from the ridge. Only the house's own sounds in company. Porch boards groaning, wire rattling, nails breathing. I unbuckled the belt. The Colt's grip kissed the table edge with a light tack. The old oil scent flaring on my hand. The leech-shaped stain pressed my eye like a finger with a nail. I set it back on its wall space, exactly where it had been. The room's knowing eye followed, as if the wall had its mark returned. Then I stopped, took it down. Didn't latch it, didn't hang it. I carried it once around the room, one hand under the grip, the other on the frame, finger always outside the guard. At last, I laid it flat across the table, over the tin box. Metal on metal made a dull note under the wind. The silver piece lay in my pocket, its edge pressing my breastbone like a sliver of broken bone. Not yet. First, I stepped to the porch, sat on the stair where the rainy season crack split the board. From here the dry well stood in line. The sun drained behind the hills, leaving a thin smear of light along the stone lip like brushed oil. I rested my elbows on my knees, opened the pouch, and drew the silver out. It's heavier out of the shade, its edges worn smooth, like river stone. In the center, 4 strokes meet. I turn it. The back isn't. Touch them. Edges jagged, dry moss along the groove's back. Dust settled there like old ash. I don't know when those marks were made. Maybe they've always been there, unseen. Maybe someone cut them on a night I was gone. Maybe my father's hand before he died. I set the silver piece near the marks, compare. Not the same. Not far. Close enough to know it hadn't come to the wrong place. My throat tightens, not from dust, but from knowing too late. Wind shifts. A thin sound rises from below, like brass tapping stone where no water lies. Her words, her opening cut, surface with it. Whoever's kept you alive this long is dead. I don't say it out loud. I taste it, hold it in my teeth, then drop it into my chest. It doesn't fall into the well. It falls into me. I walk the fence line. The 5th post is loose. I press my weight into it. It doesn't set. I lift the hammer. 2 strikes. The nail sounds different, low, sticky, like the wood wants to hold itself in place. I stop. Rest the hammer's head on the ground, the handle upright like a marker. I lean my forehead against it, breathing long, without sound. Back inside, 2nd drawer, where I keep the leather wrap for the Winchester's stock. It's still there, the oil dry. Under it, my fingers hit folded yellow paper, corner burned away. I pull it out, drawn in pencil, dull point, 4 strokes meeting, the 2nd line unsteady. Below it, 2 hurried letters, not round, not straight. I set it beside the silver, the mark on the silver cut with a sharp knife, the mark on the paper drawn with a tired hand. Same person, same meaning, same place? No answer, but side by side they make the room feel smaller, not from clutter. I light the small lamp. Gold light pools on the table, catches the colt. The steel throws a thin white thread to the ceiling. I sit, set the holster strap beside me. My hand pauses on the grip. Near the loading gate, a fresh scratch. The wood pale, as wide as a fingernail edge. It wasn't there yesterday. Made out on the flat or on the way home. Could be her, could be someone else. The room's back grows cold from it. I drop a chair without asking. Only the wind lifts the curtain and lets it fall. I wrap a leather strap around the Colt's barrel so the grip won't scuff the table. The strap brushes the leech-shaped stain, the faint wet dust smell of old blood. I ease my chair back so my legs don't touch the gun's shadow. Still. The lamp ticks with the wind. The wick trembles. Soot clings to the glass. I turn the knob down, let the light rest only on the cup's rim and part of the grip. I go to the well when night has taken the place. No clouds, sparse stars. Wind from the dry river smells of old salt. I sit at the rim, back to stone. The silver comes out again. It turns in my palm under the push of another finger. Its touch makes no sound. I lean forward, hold it close to the edge, don't let go. Just give the wind its breath. The hollow below holds the sound longer than in daylight. Maybe night deepens spaces. Leaning lower, I find a faint, new cut beneath the rim on the left side, crossing two of the old marks, broken in the middle. A slipped knife. The hand tired or startled. From afar, it means nothing. Up close, it's a letter abandoned halfway. I set my nail in it. Edge frayed, moss soft. My throat tightens another notch, like someone's placed a stone there and told me to keep it. Her line arrives with the wind, full into the well's mouth. Whoever's kept you alive this long is dead. I can't tell who she meant. The carver, the hider, the pursuer, the one who fired to clear her path so she could vanish with the gold. I let the line stand in the middle, like a post without a name. I don't drive it off. Don't take it in. A bat passes overhead, shadow folding and unfolding like a hand. Somewhere, a faint metal click. Not a gun, like tripod legs against a saddle latch. The rise is still, my house still. I touch the silver again, push it back in my pocket, let it dig into the bone, keep it. I walk the fence one last time before going in. Where the wire's not joined, the end curls like a hook. I think about tying it now. I stand there. Then don't. Morning will do. Tonight, the wire stays open. Let the nails breathe. In the dark, everything sounds clearer. One sharp breath will tell enough about a man. I'll let the house speak in wood, in wire, in the space on the wall. Before I shut the door, I look back. The well's black mouth not wanting to talk. The rim faint in the lamp's spill. Inside, the hollow waits. I lock, bar, wedge. Through the door crack, like a stranger crossing the yard, without wanting to be seen. I close my eyes, don't sleep. The line comes through me again. Slow, heavy, tight. Whoever's kept you alive this long is dead. I don't know who I've lost. The woman with the gold and the knife-edge words. My father with his marks in stone and the paper charred years ago. Or the shell I've been in for 12 years. I'm not sure what I've kept. A standing house. A hung rifle. A piece of silver pressing my chest. And a space on the wall, like another well mouth no one's filled. The wind shifts. The hollow rises under the door, touches her line, and stays. I leave it there, like a silent guest in the opposite chair, staring, unblinking. Out here, sometimes silence is the truest part of speech. And the night long enough to know, tomorrow the fence will still be unfinished, the well still dry, the colt's place on the wall still empty, and me I'll still be sitting between what's here and what's not, hands unable to tie a single wire, because of a piece of silver in my pocket grown heavier. In the end, the yard is still. On the wall, the hooks remain bare. The smell of old gun oil still on my hands. In my pocket, the silver with 4 carved strokes pressing my chest like a wordless reminder. The well still dry. Beneath its stone rim, 4 old knife cuts. They tell a story different from the one spoken loud on the rise. Betrayal, or just the way a man breathing still names himself. Some leave the herd to live. Some hold the past to die with their right name. Some fire the colt so another can vanish with the gold. What's left is a gap on the wall and a line with no shut mouth. With it truer to keep the gun or keep the words? Are the 4 cuts in the stone a signpost or a confession? In this story, who is the real betrayer? The one who carried the colt away, the one who carved the mark, or the one who kept watch over a dry well for 12 years?